how much do you think then that the run that we've had on inflation the last couple of years has played a role into this? I mean, obviously, there's the component of the price run-up we've seen in properties over the last couple of years as well. People that, had a house valued at $300,000 pre-pandemic probably saw between $50,000 and $100,000, depending on the size of the house, extra value in their home in just a couple of years.
That's right. So that's certainly there's been pandemic factors in the past that I think have led to an increase in inflation. I think going forward, the policy challenge for instance, monetary policy makers is the idea of raising rates, right? Which is why mortgage rates are so high today. The goal was to dampen inflation. Yep. But what we just discussed, these are in the labor market as well as in the housing market. These are actually two factors caused by lock-in that may, if anything, be inflationary, right? We're not putting our houses up for sale. We're also not buying, but I think the lack of liquidity and inventory seems to generate upward price pressure. So house prices have remained really remarkably high, given that rates are so high. As well as, maybe you have to compensate, for instance, firms and workers, right? In order to move, maybe you have to offer part of the compensation package. You may have to entice someone to pay a bit more. So there's, I think, risks around lock-in where the policy has raised interest rates, but actually there may be effects that are inflationary coming through lock-in.
What's interesting right now is, we're looking at rates at around 7%, and I think people are trying to figure out where that sweet spot is that'll really start to drive a lot of activity. Do you need to get rates on average down closer to 6%, 5.5%, whatever that number is, in order to have people thinking, okay, now I feel like that level of value between the mortgage I have and the one I would take is close enough where I don't feel like I'm putting myself in a bind.
That's certainly true. I don't think there's a magic number, even though maybe people have these kind of thresholds in mind, like, I'm waiting for it to hit 5%. Yeah. What we would say as economists is basically like it's very difficult to time exactly when rates come down, and rates they may stay higher, right? That's been a surprise in the latest inflation news, and so you should make your decisions based on your personal circumstances. And so there's obviously typically there's an option to refinance if rates come down. So that's a way to, even if you had to take out a mortgage rate today at higher rates, you can refinance down. Obviously, there's a cost involved with that, and you have to make sure there's no prepayment penalty. So that's maybe like more practical advice. But you should definitely not try to time the market. I think that's very difficult to do, given that we don't see a super clear path.
Well, and I guess to a degree, the market that a person is in has to factor in here as well. When you think about, the value of a home in Montana or Utah or North Dakota is going to be a lot different, most likely in many cases, to what, we see here in Philadelphia or New York or Chicago. And that, to a degree, I guess, also brings me to the question about if there is kind of an incentive put forward by the government to try and ease this lock-in, is it better to have it at the federal level, or do you need to have some combination with the state and local governments coming in as well because of that difference in cost and value?
Absolutely. So that's what we're hoping to tackle. And new research is try to kind of model the housing market with this kind of housing ladder and different types of housing and different prices in different regions. So you may have to really finely calibrate any such intervention. An alternative intervention that we also want to highlight and I think promote going forward is there are actually ways in which you can unlock the market through mortgage contracts. So in some countries, it is actually possible to take your mortgage with you when you're moving.
The rate.
And exactly.
Take the rate with you.
Take the rate, exactly. Take the mortgage and the rate with you. And the friction right now in the U.S. is that basically you as the borrower, you would ideally want to go to your bank and maybe renegotiate and ask them for you to port the mortgage or maybe take some part of the rate, keep some of that with you as you're moving. But that's typically not possible because mortgages are securitized and sold to mortgage-backed securities investors, and so you typically end up negotiating with the mortgage servicer. And there's been, some evidence following the financial crisis and some kind of case studies these days of how difficult is it. They typically don't have the right incentives to renegotiate with you. There's not that much in it for them. Right. And so I think if the government were to step in, it could certainly incentivize, maybe provide some benefits in terms of allowing servicers to renegotiate.
Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.